How does a prominent U.S. senator react to all of this? John Thune with us right now, South Dakota, the Senate Minority Whip. Senator, what do you think of what the president wants to do? I've already heard from a number of House members who have doubts that it's even legal. What do you think?
Well, Neil, I think it's the Biden inflation hits just keep on coming. He keeps coming up with new ways to increase inflation in our economy. This will certainly do that. It'll increase the cost of college education because tuition costs are going to go up. And I think it'll add to inflation because it's pumping more money out into the economy at a time when we've had record 40-year high inflation. So here's the problem with this. You've got 87% of the people in this country don't have student debt. So they're going to subsidize the 13% who do, and the 87% who don't have student loan debt are going to pay for it in the form of maybe higher taxes down the road. Obviously, they're just putting it on the debt right now, but they're also going to pay for it in the form of higher inflation. And I just think this is a huge attempt by Democrats to try and, in a very transparent way, get votes of younger people going into the midterm elections.
What if it does cynically just that, though, Senator? I mean, there are already some early surprises in surveys and even midterm primary results, including this surprising win by a Democrat in a flip region, working on the whole Roe v. Wade fallout, that maybe Democrats finally hit a sweet spot here. Does this worry you?
Well, look, I think the politics are very clear, Neil. They are. This is an attempt to buy votes. Democrats are trying to change the subject. They're trying not to talk about inflation and the broken border and energy costs and crime in our streets. They're trying to shift it to something that they think is more favorable ground for them. And the way they do that, in most cases, is they buy it. Democrats spend money, they raise taxes, they grow and expand government. That is what they do. And in this case, at least, $300 billion. I mean, think about that. Just like that, the Democrats dropped $300 billion in hopes, again, that it has some positive political benefit. But good. In the long run, this hurts. This hurts the economy, this contributes to inflation, and more importantly, as has already been pointed out by your reporters, this sends a really wrong message to people in this country. This is a country that was built upon a principle of personal, individual responsibility, and what you're saying here to a whole lot of people in this country is go ahead, take out loans, don't worry about it, we'll just write it off when the time comes. And again, that may make a few people happy in the near term, but this is going to have long-term consequences that are very, I would say, devastating to the whole principle and ethic that sort of undergirds the American experiment. But in the near term, it's going to have a negative, I think, economic consequence as well, because it's going to add to the cost of tuition to go to college in this country.
Yeah, we've heard a number of former top economic officials, both in the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, say pretty much the same. But, Senator, if I could switch gears a little bit. Not too long ago, Mitch McConnell had bemoaned election prospects for Republicans in the Senate, that they might win the House. Senate's going to prove dicier. But he talked about the quality of the candidates. And I'm wondering if he was making a reference to some of the Trump-backed candidates who some in your party are concerned might be able to win a primary but not the general election. Do you share that?
Look, I think what he's trying to do is send a message that we can't take this for granted. It was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, to a lot of people who are maybe taking for granted the fact that we should get the Senate back, that the Senate's in play. And I think what that means is that people in this country, if they want to change the direction of the country, have to get out and vote. Now, it doesn't matter what state you're in or who the candidate is. This is going to be a very simple binary choice for people in this country. You're either going to be for the Biden agenda, you're going to be a vote for that, or you're going to be a vote against it and hopefully for a Republican majority that can be a check and balance against a very radical, extreme Biden agenda.
I think Mitch McConnell was saying quite the opposite, that he was holding out the prospect that it might be a binary choice, but it's complicated by some of the Republican choices in these states. Do you buy that?
Well, I think Republicans around the country have weighed in, and we now have our slate of candidates, and our job now is to try and get Republicans elected to the Senate, because the very simple reality of all this, Neil, is whoever controls the Senate controls the agenda. Right now that's controlled by Chuck Schumer and the Democrats and a Biden administration that has, I think, a reckless and radical agenda. Same thing's true in the House of Representatives. They run the whole of government. They've got unified control right now. We need a check and a balance. And I think that irrespective of who the nominees are through the primaries, the Republicans in these states have voted. It's now up to us to do our best to try and help them succeed. And I think Senator McConnell and our team, Republican team, will be doing everything we can to ensure that a lot of those candidates in those competitive races get across the finish line on Election Day.
Senator, I had a chance yesterday to talk to Anthony Fauci before he formally steps down. He says he's not leaving Washington, but the issue was raised whether he was doing this to time with potential Republican probes into how we handle COVID. This is from Dr. Fauci yesterday. This wasn't a way to avoid Republican investigations if they take over the House and/or the Senate.
Oh, Neil, not at all. Not even a little bit. I mean, I have nothing to hide, and I can defend everything I've done and every decision I've made. So I'm not afraid of that at all. That didn't even come in as a minor consideration.
So he seems to be willing, if he's called to Congress, to testify, certainly on the House side. Depends what happens on the Senate side and who's in control, I guess. But what do you think of that?
Well, I think oversight is an important role of Congress. And that's why the founders created the three branches of the government, so they could hold each other accountable. And, clearly there have been, as has already been acknowledged, the CDC came out earlier this week and acknowledged a lot of mistakes were made with respect to COVID. And I think that if and when we were to get the majorities back, that's a fundamental part of our responsibility as members of Congress, and that is to hold federal agencies that are supported by the taxpayers and hundreds of thousands of employees there accountable to those taxpayers and to the American public. So would there be some oversight? Yeah, probably, because I think those hard questions need to be asked. People have a lot of questions about policies and decisions that were made throughout the course of the pandemic, and I think that, again, is just a fundamental responsibility that members of Congress have, and that is to do the oversight of the executive branch of our government that our founders intended us to do.
Senator, our Peter Doocy caught up with the Education Secretary Cardona on some of the monies and efforts being made to make things right for kids who had missed so much school or were doing it remotely, saying that we've got to address that and help them out. But just yesterday, Dr. Fauci, when he was with me, was saying that nobody has been harmed by these years out of school. So who's right?
Well, I think, Neil, I mean, I don't know what he's looking at, but I can tell you just from talking to people all across my state, and I'm sure you hear this from other places around the country, the impact this had on students and kids and their ability to learn at the fastest rate possible. I mean, you want to optimize your children's opportunities to learn. I've got a couple of grandkids who are starting school this year. I can't imagine trying to educate them at home virtually. And I think the fact that the statistics actually, I think, bear out that there was some serious harm done to our children who weren't able to be in the classroom and get the benefit of everything that comes with that. I don't think there's any question about that. So I don't know how you could make a statement like that, a blanket statement like that. I just don't think it squares with the facts, and it certainly doesn't square with the experience that parents and kids in this country had during the course of the pandemic.
I don't know what's more newsworthy there, what you just said, or the fact that you're younger than me and you're a grandparent, but I'll have to deal with that separately during the break. Right. Senator, very good seeing you again.
I don't look younger than you, Neil. That's a good thing for you.
Oh, please, please. That kind of bums me out. Well, we'll see what happens. Senator, always good seeing you. Senator Thune, on all of that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.